So I only got about 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I'll try to hurry it up because it's just review. So he's saying in less controlled territories, it was less intense. This propaganda, political mobilization. On one hand, attempts were made to reach enemy troops through prisoners. Captured enemy soldiers were subject to intensive propaganda, new political formation, complete transformation of their view of the world, aka brainwashing. So this is the breaking process. And then they were released, breaking and remolding, by Mulder from the X-Files. The X-Men coming to take over the land. And you can't see them because they're all in the brain. Viruses, unseen forces. The liberation of the soldiers was in itself a propaganda act designed to show the communists' generosity towards their opponents. But beyond that, the released soldiers were meant to exhibit their new attitudes in the midst of the old army. But beyond that, the released soldiers were meant to exhibit their new attitudes in the midst of the old army. So they're just sending infected individuals back into the enemy target population. Hence, immigration was initially considered a serious issue to be dealt with seriously, and hopefully at one time with justice. But I wonder what happens in the ships, in the just ships, the adjusted ships that bring us here. So obviously, captured enemy soldiers subject to intensive propaganda, new political formation, complete transformation of their view of the world, aka good old-fashioned American dream, brainwashing. Then they were released. This liberation was in itself a propaganda act, I guess, for other people in the back home, designed to show the communist generosity towards their opponents. But beyond that, the released soldiers were meant to exhibit their new attitudes in the midst of the old army. On the other hand, so one hand was the captured soldiers, and the other hand, the revolutionary struggle led Mao temporarily to occupy zones that were later abandoned. They're still talking about the less controlled areas. These are their techniques of taking over through propaganda. On the other hand, the revolutionary struggle led Mao, so hence the people who talk about, death penalty, like death is the worst thing in the world. No, being a POV is the worst thing in the world. Just ask Alex from the Clockwork Orange. On the other hand, the revolutionary struggle led Mao temporarily to occupy zones that were later abandoned, and frequently with much infiltration and a great flow of people back and forth. I hate that. Kill all undocumented smugglers. Damn. It's a great flow of people back and forth. Much infiltration. Right? The crime gangs from the south of the border, taking over with their armies on the streets. Alright, anyway, that's just theory. Here the purpose was to leave an ideologically formed population behind when the Revolutionary Army had to withdraw. So they're sending in the agents, Agent Smiths, and other droids to blend in and slowly and steadily take over the propaganda, take over the minds of men. In the face of an enemy without any ideological weapon, this permitted Mao, little by little, to contaminate the enemy army when it occupied these territories. This reminds me of the British takeover of India, because there was no ideological unity. They were all different cultures. So little by little, over time, they contaminated the territories and eventually had the Raj, the British Raj. To be sure, these zones could not be left too long without propaganda. Infiltration and partial occupation had to take place to renew and strengthen political education. So infiltration, partial occupation, hence you can't kick out immigrants from certain zones, and after the infiltration had taken place, to renew and strengthen political education. They're always pushing the Mexican values and the Mexican language and the Mexican flag in the schools. And I remember me as a teacher, I was scared to say anything about it. That's how bad the propaganda has taken over. So at that stage, political education consisted in taking the prevailing misery, the widespread oppression, and the spontaneous reactions against it as points of departure for providing. So they're taking all the negatives as points of departure for providing coherent explanations. So when you're in a confused state, the propaganda is delivering you a coherent explanation for designating who the enemy is. That could serve to catalyze the existing hatreds. So that's the whole boogeyman aspect of the things. For sketching out the myth of liberation, so the false dreams, and for showing the means of that liberation. And for showing the means of that liberation. How to attain the liberation. And that is cooperation of the people and adherence to communism. Any means necessary. And you must cooperate. That's what I was saying earlier about my guilty conscience. But anyway, with all these elements united into a solid whole. Okay? So that's the political mobilization for the easy zone and the difficult zones. Next we have organization. We already talked about education. The propagandized people had to be inserted into a system. During the period of battle, Mao's organization contained three elements. First, peasant unions designed to organize the peasants of a region to disseminate slogans and to explain them in discussion groups. So during the period of battle, Mao's organization contained three elements: peasant unions and parallel hierarchy, the gray zone, and the army, or the foot soldiers, the dumb and stupid animals, according to Henry Kissinger himself, and John Kerry, big war hawks. The propagandized people had to be inserted into a system, shitstem. During the month of battle, Mao's organization contained three elements: peasant unions designed to organize the peasants of a region, disseminate slogans, and to explain them in discussion groups. These unions, with their very large membership and their very liberal orientation, this is what Trump talked about with the education system, very liberal, intolerantly liberal, were under the official direction of the party. Actually, I shouldn't say that because I shouldn't correlate the word liberal from 1965 to liberal today. In fact, this whole message could be lost just with the change of language within the last 40, 50 years. But hence, he's written in such a technical and thorough fashion to ensure that doesn't happen. And hence, it is so insightful or remarkable to somebody like me. So, these unions were under the official direction of the party. Mao could say with justification, would it have been possible, even if we had set up tens of thousands of schools for political education, to educate all the men and women, even in the remotest villages, in so short a time? These peasant unions were neither combat nor action organizations, but large groupings to serve the purposes of psychological organization and polarization. So one has to be careful who the leaders are, because if they're promoting these themes of the propagandist, which they would do, maybe even accidentally, because that's what they have been trained, then obviously it's propaganda and it's danger, threat to society. Not individuals, but groups we need to worry about. Because a mob is much more lethal and much more unjust. At least generally speaking. So if we had, so he was just bragging about his success. So they were neither combat nor action organizations. They sounded awesome probably to the people, like the Girl Scouts, with large groupings to serve the purpose of psychological organization and polarization. Hence the danger, the polarization and the psychological organization. The second element was the famous parallel hierarchy. Wow, I've been labeled disorganized psychologically. I guess I need to be a good little peasant. The second element was the famous parallel hierarchy. Parallel hierarchy. Side by side with the official administration, even the administration of the enemy, a clandestine, revolutionary, and complete administration was being built. This administration had its own finances, its own police, and very precise propaganda functions. The point was, Mao said, to mobilize the masses by resorting to organization work. Actually, this administration transformed general ideas and new views, acquired as a result of political education, into action. Oh yeah, this reminds me of the Indian TV shows my mom watches, with the soap operas. They're always promoting the change we can believe in and the political appropriate change. And that's one of their slogans, actually. Something about the proper guidance. Total 1984 style. So this administration transformed general ideas and new views acquired as a result of political action into action. rations, supplies, wages, and so on. So hence, they're not using the right information or the right techniques for individual growth, what they're just trying to obtain an action from as many as possible. So that's what propaganda is about, and that's what they're talking about. So social and economic transformation had to take place on the inside and secretly. So the social and economic transformation is a secret thing until it could be superimposed on prior organization. And the participation of the individuals on all levels was needed to strengthen the conviction that this transformation was not imposed from outside and above. And this kind of reminds me of St. Paul talking in the 2 Corinthians, talking about the organization and the propaganda needed and so forth. So transforming the ideas into action, social and economic transformation taking place on the inside and secretly until it could be superimposed on prior organization. So many people warned about the economic collapse for years, even this one. And, well, Trump only provided temporary relief, looks like. Social and economic transformation. So social transformation too. Society became more closed-minded, narrow-minded, very judgmental, and very harsh towards each other. And that's because we are all being squeezed together, tighter and tighter, with the wall. The two-pronged attack. So then it was superimposed on the organization, prior organization, and everybody was important to this transformation. And they were important because they were basically cloaking the transformation and making sure that people didn't suspect who was responsible, and that someone was even responsible other than the obvious person who everyone thinks, the previous organization, I guess. The methods of mobilizing the masses must not be bureaucratic, Mao said. The parallel hierarchy was called upon to make propaganda in every instance in order to create a sense of participation in the common work, with Mao knowing full well that as soon as this feeling of participation was acquired, all action would provide its own justification and would involve the individuals more deeply. So these guys make propaganda in every instance and create a sense of participation in the common work. Sounds like total propaganda. With Mao knowing full well that when the participation is acquired, all action would provide its own justification. So it's like once you get them, once you hook the fish, then you can use them forever. Kind of like Pinky and the Brain. Because now they're running on the treadmill. So it would involve the individuals more deeply, so they'll become more involved. Human nature gets involved and so forth. So they become willing slaves. Mao often insisted that the creation of the parallel hierarchy could serve no purpose without this propaganda designed to lead people to act spontaneously. So everyone believes that they're making their own choices, but it's not really very possible for the vast majority today. With technology up our mother freaking earlobes. Anyway, this third propaganda organization was the army. The proletariat, the special proletariat, and the hierarchy. That's parallel. So I guess they have their upper class and lower class, upper party and lower party. Finally, the third organization propaganda was the army. The Red Army is an armed organization fulfilling the political tasks of the revolution. It has important tasks to fulfill: propaganda among the masses, organization of the masses, and so on. Propaganda and organization, and on and on. The Red Army does not make war for war's sake. So the Red Army Special is not just a typical war department. This war is a war for propaganda in the midst of the masses. A war for propaganda in the midst of the masses. What does that mean? The first task was to shape the soldiers of the Red Army. Oh, so it's a war for propaganda, right? Over the masses. Or to create that environment, I guess. The first task was to shape the soldiers of that Red Army, to teach them why they had to fight, and then to turn them into propagandists and carriers of these ideas. To shape the soldiers, teach them why they gotta fight, and turn them into propagandists and carriers of ideas. The molding process. They had to live symbiotically with the civilians in order to conquer the people ideologically and progressively assimilate them. Dang. They live. Style. Such propaganda methods are subtle and numerous. They cover the whole gamut from terror to indoctrination, from parades to involvement in action. So the methods of propaganda are subtle and they're numerous. They cover the whole gamut from terror to indoctrination, from parades to involvement in action. But it can take place only in the case of a strictly popular army. This emerges from the famous and oft-repeated formula: the army must function among the people like a fish in water. This implies, of course, that such an army must be recruited from the population, express it, find support in it, share its interests, never act as it would in a conquered country, serve the public, and that its struggle have positive meaning for the people. So they're from us, look like us, sound like us, behave like we would, and serve us. And there comes their saving grace, or winning grace. And that its struggle have positive meaning for the people. Okay. So that's another thing he added. So the army is not seen as a bunch of murderers of innocent people who just drag innocent people out of their homes and turn them into refugees and killed and starved for months and years. Oh no, they're doing a positive cause, making us so free, making us so we can walk around naked and not have to be forced by these mean guys to wear burqas all day. You know? These Trump types, but Muslim. ISIS supporters. Anyway. Prior conditions are not fulfilled. No propaganda instrument can be made out of the army. So that's you have to be train the soldiers and recruit the soldiers and then evaluate the soldiers and even reject the soldiers. This accounts for the failure of the attempt to adopt Mao's methods in Algeria. The Red Army is a propaganda apparatus because it is formed on the basis of ideology and because its presence mobilizes the people. So the Marxist ideology and the hysteria are proof of the Red Army in our Red Dawn 2020 America. So the army have no choice but to participate and to become involved. The individuals involved, I guess, have no choice but to participate and become involved because group pressure is a serious thing. Oh man. So since 1949 now, this is the second part. I think I better come back to this in the next video before the camera dies out.